Today we are joined by Gabriela, Head of Policy, Research and Campaigns at Glitch. Glitch is an award-winning charity committed to ending online abuse. Their movement has succeeded in prioritising the safety of women and girls in their Online Safety Act. Gabriela, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
For our first question, from your research, what are the most critical areas that need attention in regulating online abuse?
So Glitch's work focuses on online gender-based violence, and there are three critical areas I can talk about today. So the first is currently the Online Safety Act makes risk assessments for violence against women and girls optional to tech companies rather than mandatory. So that it's a guidance rather than a code of practice. And that's a really, really core issue for us. Our most recent report documents the alarming prevalence of digital misogynoir and misogyny across 5 major social media platforms. And by digital misogynoir, I mean the kind of continued unchecked dehumanization of Black women online. And that comes from the term coined by Moya Bailey, Dr. Moya Bailey, misogynoir, which is the specific venom directed at Black women in the wider context of misogyny. So what we really see as a critical area there is that tech companies should be able to and should be asked to, in a mandatory way, not an optional way, do risk assessments for violence against women and girls, because we know this is such a prevalent and serious issue on their platforms. Second is the currently very minimal commitment and low levels of investment in prevention. So we know from our research that abuse targeting candidates in election periods, specifically Black women in those periods, shows us that a lot of people are going far beyond holding politicians to account, and they are participating in death threats, rape threats, and really violent abuse. And we also know from our work that digital literacy works. Prevention work works to improve safety, to improve empowerment online, and to improve attitude towards online safety. So if we want to stay ahead of the curve in terms of digital safety, we need to ensure we're not constantly trying to catch legislation up to new technical tools, and we need to start at the source and invest in long-term expert prevention work that bolsters digital literacy. So, for example, national guidance on digital safety, employer guidance on digital safety. We need Ofcom to go further in their ambitions around media literacy and their recent strategy they put out for consultation. And tech companies have an important role in this, as do government. So we really want to see government ring fence 2% of the digital services tax to put that money towards prevention work. And that's something quite simple, where there can be that kind of long-term funding to support that work. And the third area, we are currently underprepared for AI harms, to say the least. We already know AI harms are impacting our societies, our communities. The government has made a commitment to bring forward legislation in this area, but we really need to see that soon, and we need to see that as legislation that stops harm at the source, so at the development and deployment of tools. And we've been doing specific research in the generative AI space, so looking at the kind of alarming rates of deepfake abuse that's impacting women at the moment.
Great, thank you. And so my next question was about who to hold account. But you briefly touched on risk assessments and the government. But what's your opinion on platforms themselves being held accountable? For example, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, who is really liable?
Yeah, so Glitch works with both government and tech companies. We see it as both and not an either or. Government legislation, it has the aim of holding tech companies to account. And our overall aim here is to stop online abuse, right? We want to keep people safe. We want to support groups such as Black women who experience disproportionate abuse online, to thrive online, to enjoy online, to flourish, and to get the benefits that technology can give us all. But to achieve that, tech companies do need to be accountable. And what we know from the prevalence, for example, of online gender-based violence on their platform is that tech companies are making decisions to allow these forms of abuse to continue. And that's because what we've seen over time is that the safety of their users is less important than commercial incentives around advertising profits, keeping us online to take kind of understand more about our data and our behavior. And those incentives are counter to our safety in lots of ways. So content that keeps us engaged is often the most extreme content. It's not necessarily things we're enjoying. It's not necessarily content that's keeping us safe, but it keeps us on platforms. And so those commercial incentives need to be handled. And it's clear that tech companies won't do this work unless legislation is really pushing their hand on it. So we do work directly with tech companies. We work on trust and safety councils. So I was previously on the Twitter Trust and Safety Council before it became X, and we're currently on TikTok Trust and Safety Council. And that direct work with trust and safety teams is absolutely fundamental. But the reality is the investment in those teams has reduced in recent years. We've seen a lot of cuts to trust and safety work. We've seen a lot of policies being completely taken away. So Twitter previously had a hateful conduct policy that was actually quite positive in terms of how they dealt with certain forms of content, and that's been completely taken away. So we do need government to set the bar on these things so that we can better protect ourselves online.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. And there's a lot of kind of critique about monitoring online abuse, with the argument that comes from it stifling free expression. What would be your response to this argument?
So freedom of expression is not freedom to abuse.
Totally.
When we're talking about online abuse, we're talking about something far beyond hurt feelings. We're talking about death threats. We're talking about stalking and harassment, racist hate speech, targeted sexist attacks, doxing, where your personal details, such as your address, details about your kids' schools, are put online without your consent, with the intention of fueling more abuse or violence. So this is often very serious, often deliberate, coordinated attacks. When we're talking about women in public life, so politicians, celebrities, sports figures, women are often targeted and are disproportionately targeted, particularly women from ethnic minorities such as Black women or other marginalized groups. And so this kind of intimidation and violence, the verbal threats and often, leading to violence, that pushes, that stifles freedom of expression for women, for people who are being targeted. So abuse isn't a legitimate way to kind of hold someone to account. And we've seen this in our recent work around abuse targeting candidates during the election. It's not a legitimate way to hold your local politician to account. So we strongly advocate for all politicians, and particularly Black women who are at disproportionate risk of abuse, to be able to affirm their political views and to be held accountable for their political views and their policies without being attacked on the basis of their identity or being threatened with violence. And I think that's really, really important to remember.
Great, thank you. And for a final question, I know you touched on the role of AI, but what do you think about the next biggest challenges in online safety, and kind of how best can we prepare for it?
So generative AI is a huge challenge for us in online safety. Our recent work around deepfake abuse has shown us that the tools are becoming more proliferating more widely because a lot of the code is open source, and the kind of level of abuse is increasing. They're also more sophisticated. So when we're talking about deep fakes, we're talking about technologies that can manipulate voice, image, video, and create that kind of synthetic content. And we know that this technology can, in theory, be used for entertainment, for scientific purposes, for medical advancements. But a recent 2023 report from Security Hero shows that 98% of all deepfake videos are image-based sexual abuse. So that's non-consensual, sexually explicit content. And 99% of that targets women. And so we have a really core problem, again, thinking through the lens of online gender-based violence, of how AI tools are being used in that context. And we need to grapple with that. We're seeing some bold changes in the EU via the EU AI Act. And we're seeing some important legislative decisions being taken there. There are still gaps, but they're at least taking steps around AI, the use of AI in public services, and kind of bringing that accountability framework to developers as well as when tools are deployed. So we're working on the EU AI Act, to try and bring in gender-based violence as a systemic risk there, but more generally, AI harms, the use of AI in public services, generative AI is something that we need to grapple with.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gabriela. That's been really insightful.
Thank you.